Veloz and Flor Schukking. I met them only recently myself at this wonderful conference on the noosphere, the 100th anniversary of the origin of that word. And that was organized by our partner organization, Human Energy. And so that's where we met, and I think we kind of instantly bonded in a sense in terms of our approaches. And we left that conference wanting to explore collaborative potential. And this seminar is really the first step of that, where we get to hear what you two do at length, and but definitely with collaborative potential in mind. And that's true for almost all of our seminars. We do not like one-offs. We like to have continuous interactions. And so I hope this will be the beginning of our continuous interactions. And so with that, Tomas and Flor, please take the floor, and we look forward to hearing you, and lots of time for Q&A as always, so that we really do get to explore collaborative potential.
Thank you. Are you sharing screen, Flor? Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
So, yeah, I will briefly begin the talk. More than speaking about the topic itself, is to introduce myself and why are we here and so on, and Flor. So I work in between Belgium and Chile. Tomas Veloz. I have a training in physics and mathematics, computer science, and my PhD was on interdisciplinary studies. So I've been moving towards more social stuff, you know, from the very physics to the social. These are my positions. You can see in Belgium and Chile, I have like professor and postdoc. And I also have a foundation in Chile, which I will mention briefly, but important is that in Belgium, I have this SIMP group, which stands for Systemic Modeling and Applications. I've been working at the Center Leo Apostel in Belgium, that is a pioneer institute in transdisciplinary research. It started in 1995 and started by, well, theoretical physicists, and currently the director is Francis Heiligen, a cybernetician that started the Principia Cybernetica project. I don't know if you're familiar with, I know David is familiar with this. And the idea is to integrate multiple disciplinary perspectives from the umbrella of systems theory and cybernetics. So that's what we have been doing for different phenomena, not just like the social problems, but also consciousness, origins of life, and yeah, psychological phenomena, or management, or economic phenomena, and so on. So the spirit of the Center Leo Apostel is to integrate different perspectives with a conceptual umbrella based on systems theory and cybernetics. So this is why the systemic modeling group has an extra spin on slightly prone to science, to scientific thinking. That's and modeling, mathematical modeling, because my training is more on modeling. So we tend to go towards modeling, though the group has researchers from different backgrounds. As you see, Flor here, this is Fabricio, an engineer, this is a sociologist, and this is a musician, Evo is a mathematician, Clement a philosopher, this is a theater maker, and so on. Musicians here, Christian Gendrake in the picture, who is also in the audience, one of our dear collaborators. And the group has both students and professors. So the students work as an autopoietic unit. And that's the interest of speaking about this, because it's a sort of social experiment where each student coming to the group by its own motivation, because they like what we do, they have dreams and goals to become a researcher, they like interdisciplinarity and so on. So they come naturally, like they have come naturally from 2020. We now have like 10 students from different latitudes, and they start joining to our meetings, which are bi-weekly, and then acquiring a role. maybe coordinate a specific kind of meeting, maybe send reminders, maybe coordinate the full thing, the calendar, and so on. So each person is taking a different role, and the actions of different members in the group are motivating the other members to take action as well. So it became a sort of little social autopoietic experiment where students come in, become part of this cell, and leave the cell knowing how to do interdisciplinary, international, collaborative research. That's the idea. So this is a sort of nucleus that we have, and we are actually studying our own behavior. So we are doing a kind of phenomenological Husserlian studies on ourselves. And yeah, that's what SIMP is. And just to finish here with the presentation of what I'm doing and what we do together, is that I have an NGO, a non-profit organization in Chile as well, that I'm trying to link with the rest of the world, particularly with CLEA, and why not with ProSocial, that is called DICTA in Spanish, that stands for Interdisciplinary Development of Science, Technology, and Arts. And we came up with this concept of cultural media, which is something that, like, the stuff that we do that helps to develop culture. That the idea is that we have many professionals now, and we still live a miserable life in many places in the world. We still have like very big problems in the society. We see the worst now. It's incredible. It's ridiculous. And social inequality, economic inequalities, and so on. And we still have all that, despite we have so much communication, despite we have so much professionals, well-trained people, well-educated people. Something is lacking for this to change. So we propose that what we need to bring in more and more in a social autopoietic, self-growth thing, is this idea of cultural media, which is the idea of developing a specific culture within communities, virtual or in land. So, of course, this cultural media, the idea is that empowers society and provides it with identity, self-identity. I belong to this, these are my values, and so on, and self-love, myself, and also the community I'm part of, what I'm helping. And this develops synergies, collaboration, mutualism, and all these concepts. But Flor will talk more about these ideas. And just to finish, we have a magazine which is called Interdisciplinaria. You can check it out or ask me. And we publish bi-weekly articles about interdisciplinary perspectives to different problems, interdisciplinary approaches, proofs of interdisciplinary working, and also interdisciplinary profiles over history. So we already have like lots of articles, and you are welcome to check it out or write in it if you want. So it's free to write. And we will be glad to know about your experiences there. So having said that, I leave you with Flor. Flor is my student, and together, well, she will explain all the details, but I'm co-supervising her PhD thesis. So please, Flor, take the stage.
Yes, thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. I also have a brief introduction of myself. I have a background in molecular biology, so I didn't really start with sort of the artificial intelligence, but it's somewhat stumbled upon it. But once I was making this overview, I sort of recognized like, oh, it all in the end also has to do with systems, with how things are sort of connected with each other. And where in biology, I, for example, worked on optogenetic systems, which is a method to, with light, sort of activate different components in bacteria or in yeasts to sort of study the dynamics of biological circuits, sort of starting with there and then sort of combining it more with also computational things. So I made, for example, a model of growing yeast cells, which also form sort of a network together. And then I worked on sort of maybe grown a bit bigger with go towards a kidney network, which was sort of trying to figure out if certain genes are expressed together when and are connected to different kinds of diseases, to then going a little bit broader with how AI or technology is used in, for example, the media sector. And now I ended up in my PhD project, which started in September, so together with Tomas and Clea in Brussels, but also in Utrecht at the Applied University. And where maybe perhaps on the Brussels side and Clea side, it's a bit more fundamental, more towards system science, autopoietic systems, etc. And in Utrecht, it's very much applied science. So it's really focusing on how can AI be used in society, in corporations, by the government, really focusing on the endpoint of artificial intelligence, which I think is a very interesting component. In Utrecht, my supervisor is Stefan Leijnen. He is the professor of the research group there of human-centered AI. And together we work on this project. So it started quite recently in September. And also the talk will be a bit of a research that I did the past half year, presenting some ongoing work, some background, and some sort of the story that I've been working on so far. If you have any questions in between, then please raise your hand or place something in the chat. I would love to sort of make the story clear for everyone. So please let me know if there's anything in between. And I will sort of have 3 parts towards this presentation. So it's exploring a social economic perspective. But then the first part is actually identifying what is the key or dominant factor now seen within artificial intelligence, which I believe is sort of a neoliberal worldview perspective. And once we've identified the different aspects of this, we shift towards alternative perspectives that are either already there on AI or that the current work that we are doing. And then in the end, if there's time or interest, we can sort of try to reimagine some things together. And there's also still time for questions, of course. But let's start with the first aspect, which is the neoliberal perspective on intelligence. Because if we look at intelligence, it's all around us. We can find it, for example, on fungal networks that either exchange nutrients together with other trees, with other networks. They're exchanging nutrients, they're communicating together, they're sort of trying to make a coherent ecosystem together. They cooperate, they collaborate, they communicate. And also intelligence is, of course, a lot of animals themselves, but also in the sort of the creativity with everything that's around us, the diversity, through evolution, the problem solving that they have, the cooperation, and sort of being able to make these sort of super complex networks that either communicate, interact with each other. There's a lot of diversity in there. And of course, more towards human intelligence, from problem solving to cooperating to caring for each other. It's actually quite a really broad way if you start looking at the different kind of things that intelligence could be. But if we look at what we see back in AI, of course, there's also a lot of intelligence in there. But if we look concretely at what artificial intelligence is now mostly using or focusing on, it's data processing and analysis, personalization, especially targeting or marketing. I think AI sort of started to really establish itself in the marketing sector. It really got popular. It really got a lot of development in that way. Image and face recognition, automating process and optimizing. And especially this part is interesting because sometimes you can maybe see sort of bio-inspired algorithms or programs. So for example, on the right, there's an algorithm that's based on the way slime molds are growing. So they sort of have a really efficient way of sort of finding food sources. But if you then sort of try to pinpoint together what they actually sort of applied in, it's still for sort of optimizing and finding the quickest route or the most sort of efficient way to find a path. So again, it's sort of a specific kind of intelligence that it's focusing on. And if you go a little bit further, it's about foundation models. So this is, for example, large language models such as ChatGPT, but also sort of multi-purpose kind of models. So that you can use either to get the information or get some tasks that can be automated And there's still a lot of development there, of course. But if we sort of focus on this, just sort of, I at least got a feeling like this is quite a small fraction of intelligence, and a lot of intelligence that I shared in the last slide, we don't really see it back. So what type of intelligence are we actually focusing on, and who benefits from this? And if we look at the type of intelligence from the last slide, it's a lot of modeling according to a specific kind of human intelligence, which is sort of according to the model of a Homo economicus. And it sort of got attention from different kind of economists. So for example, John Stuart Mill described this as a sort of very rational man that sort of makes only rational decisions, is there to sort of think in his own self-interest, wants to get like at least amount of labor, and is sort of trying to find the most optimal thing for himself. And Ayn Rand is also an example of this. So for example, in The Virtue of Selfishness, she describes this sort of as pursuing a very narrow individual self-interest, and and through this self-interest should be sort of promoting well-being for everyone. So this is sort of a broader sense of sort of seeing this back, and sort of course, the sort of the very rational decision making is something that's often being referred to in social intelligence, but also in the way sort of this optimizing and efficiency is something that you often see back in algorithms. So for example, on the right, you sort of see this landscape, and these algorithms work by finding the most optimal solution. And this also has a sort of winner takes all approach and sort of zero-sum game dynamics, where there's only one type of winner in the algorithm. There's no cooperation, there's no benefit for everyone. A lot of options are being thrown away within these algorithms. And even in the way, so for example, the one in the middle for general adversarial networks, these are the algorithms that, for example, ChatGPT is based on. Even in the depiction or sort of the explanations of these algorithms, you already see some kind of stereotypes in there. So there's these algorithm works that one algorithm tries to sort of, if you make, for example, an image, you need to make an image of a dog, and it's trying to make a lot of fake images of dogs, which is then the generator, which is sort of referenced here as a thief. And then there's another model that should be able to distinguish, is this actually a dog or is this a fake dog? But even in the portrayal of these kind of different algorithms, there's sort of a dynamic with a fake person that's acting in self-interest and someone else sort of controlling this and making sure that there's sort of this narrow perspective on who's a winner and what is good and what is wrong. And of course, also in sort of where you actually see AI being applied in. So if you just look at pictures of where AI is sort of depicted, you see that's often in a labor context, in the corporate context, for corporate benefits, for making things more efficient. And of course, a lot of AI or machine learning algorithms focus on this efficiency of automating. And where you also see is in sort of cases where it's about devalued work. So for example, care. If you look at healthcare, for example, is sort of seen as something that can be automated just for this sort of rational way of thinking about care. Like you need to be very efficient, but then a lot of aspects of care are being forgotten in that sense. So there's a clear sort of this selfish and very rational way of thinking, benefiting selective people or just pursuing this efficiency despite of, or at least that this efficiency is the main goal. And you also sort of see this, that this is pushed quite far. So if you look at AI for an economic benefit or growth, perhaps there is a lot of economic benefit, there's a lot of revenue being created by it, but it's also at a cost for this. So there's a lot of things being difficult about AI, and I think you are all aware that it's costing a lot of energy, it's costing a lot of water, a lot of raw materials. So through this sort of self-interested approach, it also is at a cost, even if it seems positive for some. And it all sort of ties back to the sort of frame of neoliberalism. And just in case, just to make clear what I'm talking about in this sense, is it's a policy that sort of encompasses both politics and economics, and it seeks to transfer control of economic factors from the public sectors towards the private sector. I think there was something in the chat. And so it seeks for free trade, privatization, deregulation, globalization, and a reduction in union of power. And it's also the belief that greater economic freedom leads to greater economic and social progress for individuals. So we sort of see back these values, for example, Ayn Rand is saying. And it's different from liberalism, as it seeks that the government actually stimulates the economy and sort of stimulates its research for economic benefits. And in that sense, you sort of see this transfer of values towards other aspects. So it's not only in sort of this politics and economic way, but you also see a transfer from it to healthcare, education, housing, and also in technology. And sort of this perspective on that technology and sort of social economics are linked together is not new. And especially even not in artificial intelligence. So Bruce J. Berman already wrote this in 1992. And in that time, the type of AI that was currently there was mostly expert systems, which are sort of simple models or sort of decision tree-like aspect to sort of make decisions. And he then already wrote that there's a really big interest in artificial intelligence. And he really put this in the frame of why especially artificial intelligence or this sort of optimization based approach, why is it so popular? And he really puts it together in a sort of ideological role as a new technical paradigm for reconstruction of capitalism. So he really, in this article, really tells about what makes AI such a different and interesting aspect and why it gets so much economic interest. And how he frames it is that sort of this new paradigm, a new ideology is related to a third industrial revolution. And I think it's still very relevant, even though there's a lot of innovation having happened. But even then, in 1992, this kind of thing was already quite apparent. And that it's sort of a new techno-economic paradigm he talks about. So it's really a lot of different, even through this technology, we also think about sort of new principles which come to sort of management and engineering, and becomes a sort of common sense that a lot of perhaps AI designers or even ourselves don't even be not really conscious about. Like it just becomes common sense in a way that you would use AI because it's more efficient, and why wouldn't you use it? Because you know it's better to have optimal processes. And it's just a common sense thing that we sometimes might not be even aware that this is sort of not just our worldview that we're currently in. And the second industrial revolution is the revolution where, so in the beginning, in the first industrial revolution, there was, of course, machines that started becoming starting this mechanical work. And in the second industrial revolution, it was really starting to have a combination between government, between science, and between corporations sort of linking together and sort of studying for how these processes can be made more efficient. So this was sort of a control for physical labor through rationalization, fragmentation, and really studying these different aspects of manual labor. And it was also together with a shift from steam to electrical power. But especially this link between these different disciplines. So for example, that you got disciplines of aerospace engineering, chemical engineering, just these sort of different assets that make these processes better and more efficient through the use of engineering practices. And it also got, in the second industrial revolution, it was sort of conventional wisdom that there was always a way to make things more efficient, to work better, and to make a more profitable design in the end. But now with this sort of third industrial revolution, where we started to use artificial intelligence, it's not only physical labor anymore, but now there's a focus on mental processes. And sort of the same thing of this sort of compartmentalization of mechanical aspects of production lines, they are also now becoming done with sort of these mental processes. So we have analyzing how these sort of rational aspects of humans work, sort of really diving into all different kind of disciplines, sort of aiming to make this process to understand it better, to harness it better, and sort of also get this sort of control over this. I really see this process as a labor process that can be made more efficient again. And sort of this also in a sort of sequence of simple computational steps that can be done, can be ordered, that can be sort of, and they can be made in an algorithm. And of course, there's really an incentive to continue with these, because if you look at sort of economic benefits and sort of labor processes where there's a lot of mental things or where you actually need people to do it, if you can sort of make these more efficient, then it's the part that you often gain most economic benefits from. But it also sort of makes us more as a reductionist version of our brains. If you go back to the first slide with how many things you can look at intelligence, then it's a sort of reductionist version of what intelligence can be, and sort of making the brain like a computer, and then sort of making sure that you can mechanize also the human brain. And if you hear people talking about artificial intelligence, you also hear people speak about it's becoming more intelligent, it's like a 5-year-old, etc., and also sort of devaluing the intelligence that people actually have through this narrowing of the conception of what the human mind is. And I think it's really, also already in 1992, someone wrote about this. And at that point, these artificial intelligence innovations were a lot less advanced. So now I sort of have this question of, is efficiency, is analytics, analyzation, is that what makes us intelligent? Or does that fit the neoliberal capitalist paradigm? And that sort of fits this so well that we now focus on this specific part of intelligence. And then comes the question, do we need to focus on other perspectives on intelligence? So this is an image that I presented at the Noosphere conference. So this is also about the Noosphere. And if you would sort of imagine the type of Noosphere that we would have in a Western neoliberalist capitalist paradigm, and then certain values are being expressed within this collective intelligence sphere. And currently, it has a lot of focus on this technological advancement. And other pillars that we might also deem important, such as social harmony, meaningful practice, relationship with nature. There's a low incentive, at least from often for governments, for corporations, even though it's sort of lower or grassroots organizations, it might be important and might get attention. But through this sort of process of government spending, funding, it's often seen as less important. But as currently AI and technology is made through this sort of neoliberal capitalist lens, you also get a sort of feedback where these technologies reflect these values and people use it, and it becomes such a common sense that it sort of gets intensified. And because of this sort of dominates other perspectives. So there's a lot less room for other perspectives on this. They get a lot less attention. They're becoming less researched, and sort of increasing this perspective of intelligence, and sort of maybe even speeding up or accelerating this type of innovation. So then comes to my next aspect. Maybe we can do a brief question round if there's any questions on this part that I just presented.
I'd only reinforce what you're saying, and so many of these problems with AI trace to the neoclassical paradigm, which messes things up in every way. AI plus more. So I really want to affirm that point that you're making, and just eager to hear what comes next for you.
Okay. Thanks, David. Yes, Shen, you raised your hand.
Oh, I think it's very, thank you very much for that presentation. What you call neoliberal in the chat, I've called it groupthink of modern society, making humans the only living thing on the planet that tries to manage complex problems on a centralized top-down basis. My question was, how might we overcome this problem when using AI, which gathers up the majority groupthink? It just reinforces groupthink.
Yeah, of course, it's really difficult to overcome this, and I think it's also something that that sort of drives me for this research, because at some side I'm sort of like, why there's so many aspects of it that make it not a good idea to pursue it, but it feels like so difficult to stop, because it's such a big process. But then perhaps through talking about it to sort of show what other kinds of perspectives are there, making it more, because with this sort of third industrial revolution, that it becomes such a common sense thing to sort of make it uncommon anymore, that might already help some people that are not aware of actually sort of this worldview that they're basing their developments on. But it's a really difficult question to. I wish I had the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, but then I will continue. I think in the chat there was something. Oh yeah, that was your question. Yeah, so one example that I found that was already there is an original perspective on artificial intelligence, and they made sort of an indigenous protocol for AI. And they also really, also what you just mentioned, Sean, that there's sort of this Western worldview where humans are at the top and everything is deemed on a sort of lower level. And then you have sort of this more nature-centered or place-centered or country-centered design principle that they want to sort of adhere to. And they also already mentioned like this sort of ingrained thing that algorithm, or sometimes especially when in AI where people ask like, is it arcane? Do we need to have already rules in place? That they mention like they're not arcane, they're merely automated ways of expressing an opinion based on simplified views of the world. And so if there is agency of it, then it lies in the person that creates the algorithm. And they sort of wanted to show it through their own indigenous background and their indigenous values. And they sought this sort of protocol for a process, and then they made this agent-based model of a sort of knowledge system that they have where there's elders and they are in control of this knowledge, and it's restricted for others, and they need to decide if they can be shared with either country or kin, or there's specific ethics ingrained in that. And they wanted to show. So they have one example in there that if you would have a smart fridge, for example, maybe it would help you to choose the most healthy diet, or sort of this Western worldview in it. But for what they describe here in their ethics, you can, if it's like your auntie's or elders' food, then you're not allowed to touch it. So should this fridge then be saying to you like, well, you're not allowed to access this food because it's from your elders, and you're not allowed to share it or to take it. But this is something that I already found where they sort of thought about it, but they also really mention this complicated thing of sort of this struggle between, do we want to actually use it? Do we need to do it as a framework? Sort of this sort of different line or difficult line that you need to walk on. And some other thing that I did last summer, this was sort of the start of my PhD project. It was at the summer school, and this was sort of being or feeding more embodied to what this type of intelligence can be, and also become aware of your own perspective on intelligence. So it was step-by-step imagining what intelligence could mean, then identifying what you might perceive or why you might perceive it as intelligent, or and then sort of making tangents, continuing on this together and in groups. And they made this through art, through text, or through dance. So for art, there was, for example, a river that didn't really sort of find this sort of normal way of walking through a landscape, but shaped in a heart. And these are some musings of some of the participants, where they sort of trying to come up with a different kind of intelligence that these kind of animals or matter or performers, etc., what it would mean. And then you already become trying to look at different aspects than just this efficiency optimization paradigm. And of course, it doesn't lead to very concrete ways of creating artificial intelligence, but then it also really sort of quite soon becomes in this question of what would be its purpose, can we use it? So that's already, this is sort of more of becoming in this perspective of what makes you actually think and what can you see as intelligent yourself. And then a current focus that I have is on degrowth. There's two directions that I want to share with you. And so both are still ongoing. So also please share your perspective on it later if you want. Degrowth or post-growth is often also called. It's first becoming in 2007, so it's still quite new. And it was also starting from a critique on this global capitalist system, where it just pursues GDP growth at the expense of exploitation of nature and of people. And it's not that we just do the same thing, but then do less, but it's really something completely different. And it's depicted as a snail. But just because it's such a different thing, that it needs to a very radical, different worldview of how all these different kind of processes need to be done in society. And it aims for societies that prioritize social and economic well-being instead of corporate profits over production and consumption. And it sort of wants to shift this view of material components and a reduction of it to societies that go more into care, solidarity, and autonomy. And a couple of essentials that I got from their degrowth website, that it's really striving for a self-determined life and dignity for all. So it's not just about humans, but also about everyone. And this includes deceleration, time wervel, and conviviality. And this is something, the conviviality part is something that I'll go into soon. And also sort of this acknowledging this sort of global north that's sort of that's really exploiting the global south, and sort of finding or allowing for a self-determined path of social organization in the global south. But for technology, it also has a difficult position. It's also still quite new, this sort of technical thinking about what it should look like. Also for artificial intelligence, it's still quite unclear. But it really wants to acknowledge that that there's sufficiency and to social changes instead of the purely technical changes that sort of trying to improve or make things more efficient or sort of having this technical fix, but instead really focus on really thinking about why would we actually need technology in the first place, what are the really important things that we need it for, and also a radical different view of what technology can be. And also creation of open, connected, and localized economies. So then, if we focus on this word, conviviality, it's the quality of being friendly, lively, enjoyment of a festive society, or living in a convivial spirit. And Ivan Illich is a very famous philosopher in the degrowth scene. And he writes about convivial tools, and those are tools which give a person who uses them the greatest opportunity to enrich the environment and really show the fruits of his or her vision. And industry tools deny this possibility to those who use them because they allow for their designers to determine the meaning and expectation of others. So it's really quite the opposite of sort of the neoliberal thinking where through science or that sometimes some values become common sense by design actually. And examples of convivial tools are, for example, a paintbrush, a hammer, a bike. And for the more technical side, there's been an example of a 3D printer, for example. And Andrea Vetter made this whole matrix, sort of taking a lot of common themes that were extracted for developing this matrix. And there's not really a consistent definition of what convivial technology would be, but there's a lot of different perspectives on it, on the axis of relatedness, access, adaptability, biointeraction, and appropriateness. And it's really, there's really a lot in there. And it has previously been tested already with a couple of machine learning cases. And of course, it already found quite some limiting factors for what this conviviality is. It refers to the high complexity of these models, the opacity, that it's difficult to figure out why certain outcomes were made. Of course, the big environmental impact and the size of infrastructure needed. And the mitigation for these aspects are also being mentioned to perhaps make them more efficient, to have better data storage that's perhaps uses green energy, have worker or social groups or research groups that sort of really decide themselves what they want to focus on and really have this sort of decision making or really deliberate looking at what, and also power to decide what it will be used for. But it's still quite limited to what AI currently is, and trying to then sort of make this mitigated, but then still wanting, or maybe not wanting is maybe a big word, but still allowing for the use of what AI currently is without thinking if there might be alternatives there that might fit or are really born from a different worldview or from a degrowth worldview. I'm just going to check the chat for a bit. Oh, there's some resources being shared.
The stuff that I've been adding to chat for is for kind of for later, not to distract you,
Okay.
not to distract you
Okay.
during your talk.
So if we go a bit further than just wanting to use the same technology, but then make it more fitting by sort of having these mitigation steps, there are also some sort of higher level approaches that are also in this matrix as well, which sort of really ties to neoliberal values, and that also already creates some counter values towards it. So for example, fostering competition is adjacent to supporting trust, fostering individual advantage towards the community, and sort of having humans as inferior part of the system and humans having as an equal. But then going forward to the question of how can we then incorporate these kind of values or incorporate this kind of goals for artificial intelligence, even, or a different kind of artificial intelligence, and then imagining or actually thinking about what it would look like is not something that I yet established. But I feel that there are some, in this matrix, there are some factors that can be used to go for the next step. But then it still becomes difficult to ensure that it's still for an equitable, sustainable, and caring innovation for all. So currently, a lot of artificial intelligence still has a big environmental impact. So can we also take this into account? And is there a role for AI in these factors in the first place? Or should this be more on a societal or social level? Or is it possible to sort of integrate these practices for regeneration and sort of help artificial intelligence aid in this? I don't really have the answer yet, so but I'm working towards this, sort of answering this question. And a different perspective that I also want to share is on looking at sort of the way that other nature can be intelligent. So if you, for example, look at sea snails, then they have a different interaction with their environment and how they as a population react towards their ecosystem. So in a dense population, they have, for example, a slower growth rate. Their shell becomes smaller, but they have a stronger and more elongated shell and a lower body size compared to snails growing in a sparse population. So depending on their environment, they adapt their growth rate to allow a better division of resources and sustain more in their population. So if you approach this from a sort of systems or autopoietic perspective, which is seen on the bottom, then this would be an example of sustainable coupling between the autopoietic system, which is here the sea snail, interacting with their ecosystem, which has limited resources that they all need to use. And in this example here, there's a negative feedback loop for the population. So if there's more limited resources, if there's less limited resources, they slower their growth rate, inhabiting themselves and allowing the system and their ecosystem to regenerate, but still sort of perceive and become sustainable. And if we now try to compare this towards artificial intelligence systems and see them as an autopoietic perspective, and then the limited resources are, for example, the energy that we put in it, the raw materials that it needs. And even though these are not currently directly perhaps made visible, even though they are, of course, limited and they already are, at some point, they become so much more, they grow a lot more, they get a lot of economic input in there, there's a lot of research put in there, so there's a lot of resources that are being added to this system, but there's nothing that intrinsically has a negative feedback towards it, not by itself. It's sort of reacting to the resources that it's there. It's not regenerating for the environment. And so at some point it becomes an unsustainable coupling between society and the technology itself. And this is more on a sort of fundamental technology way, trying to imagine if there's technology, could it be made in a way that there's also negative feedback loops sort of already within these systems? So could we maybe make something that's more like a snail type of artificial intelligence or a snail type of slow regenerative technology? So perhaps there's more ecosystem integrating approaches. Perhaps there's something that allows for this feedback, allows for this more sustainable coupling that can be inspired from these snails. So this is currently my ongoing research. So it's more been on establishing of these kind of perspectives on neoliberal, sort of how artificial intelligence integrate with neoliberalism, and trying to both think about these different kind of perspectives in degrowth, both on a more fundamental level, that we can maybe think of different ways how technology is being shaped, or how it might be applied or might benefit more on a community level, on an individual level, on sort of fostering a more caring way for technology to exist. So that's it for now. Also, if you want to share your perspectives on this reimagination, then please feel free to share in the chat. I would really love to sort of get a lot of sort of input on this, just as a reference throughout all these years that people sort of reimagine intelligence. But also feel free to ask questions, to give your feedback or input to something that you want to share. And I really want to thank David for the opportunity to share this.
Thank you so much, Flor. Let's stop sharing so we can see our gallery, so we can see everybody. And so that was fabulous. So much to talk about. And I never like to be the first to comment. And so please raise your virtual hands, and that forms a queue. And then I always like to be third or fourth in the comments, but there's so much to talk about, and I'm sure that that's true for others as well. I'm a patient man.
Flor, that was such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I had a quick question. The diagram you showed us with you had the rings and you showed the low incentive. How did you determine what the incentive was?
Yeah, of course it's very difficult because these sort of containers that I made with feminism, degrowth, etc., they're so diverse that it's really difficult to really make a very well considered sort of decision on it. So it's not very it's not like a very strict, this is the type of what it means for feminism, or what it means for green growth, or what it means for capitalism. So it's not a very strict line for it, but it was just by looking for different perspectives on intelligence through feminism and these different ends, and trying to funnel them by myself into these categories. But it's also open with this sort of question mark aspects, like it's not perfect, and there's room for changes or for other perspectives.
Yeah, well, so maybe I should just try to chart out the common ground with this, and I've already agreed with you about the neoclassical paradigm being a big part of the problem. And I think the solution requires another paradigm, and to replace the neoclassical paradigm. And what we've had until recently is not another paradigm, but what Dennis Snower and I call diffuse pluralism. Diffuse pluralism, many contrary views, many heterodox views, which don't really cohere with each other. So if you mention, feminism indigenous thought and so on. Each of these are important, but they don't hang together in the way that the neoclassical paradigm hangs together. And so I think that what's new, and this is what makes this such an important moment, is that there is a new paradigm has matured to the point where it can replace the neoclassical paradigm. And that paradigm is based on the combination of complex system science and evolutionary science. I think that it could be said to consist of three components, which are only now coming together. One is complex system science of the physics variety, and that's most general in some sense. So basically, the complex non-living systems and all systems, living and non-living. Then there's complex living systems, and that bifurcates into two branches, which in evolutionary terms is proximate and ultimate causation. So on the one hand, you might be trained in molecular biology, and you're really looking at the mechanistic basis of life. And, the term autopoiesis is part of that way of thinking, how cells hang together and function and so on. And then there's ultimate causation, which is basically adaptation and natural selection, where such concepts as multi-level selection comes in. And I think that if we regard that package as the new paradigm, then we can make a lot of progress on a topic such as AI. And I think the other perspectives, such as indigenous wisdom and feminism and many, many, many other perspectives, they don't go away. We don't ignore them, but they just fit into the new paradigm better than they ever fit into the neoclassical paradigm. So the neoclassical paradigm pushes them out onto the periphery. That's why they're called heterodox or renegade or all these words that are used for these views. And the complexity evolution paradigm brings them to the center. And so I think that's the moment that we have, and I think that and we're both contributing to it. So actually, let me pause and have you and anyone else reflect upon that a little bit, and then I did want to make another set of comments, but maybe I could just pause and see if what your thoughts are on that. Anybody on this call? Tomas.
Hey, well, that was a great comment. I mean, I'm co-supervising this thesis, so we are dealing with exactly that problem of difficult integration of paradigms, and actually Flor and Stefan is also quite aware of the cybernetic approach, and as I said before, systems theory, cybernetic approach, the analytic foundations of the paradigm you are describing. So yeah, the comment fits quite well, and I was thinking along these lines. So it's a very simple comment, but I think it hides some depth. In cybernetics, there are certain simple mechanisms that allow a system to be, let's say, resilient. The notion of resilience. And one of these mechanisms is buffering, meaning that the components you need for functioning, you will have somehow a storage of them, so you can store this. And there is another mechanism, which is called degeneracy, which means that you have many ways to get things done. So if there is a attack, let's say, or something that breaks your system, somehow the system will find its way through other pathways because it's degenerate enough to reconstruct whatever is missing. So these two strategies hide I think they hide very, very different ways to look at economy. You know, buffering is the way to secure your future by having enough to buy whatever it's needed. You got the buffering, the money or whatever currency you're buffering stuff. It will help you to, you know, to get things done. But there is this other thing that is like nurturing perspective, where you, instead of having buffering, will build more connections to get things done. And I think that this is perhaps one way to look from a cybernetic abstract perspective, to characterize the difference between several community, you know, worldviews, like indigenous worldviews and so on, which are like more at the community level. They don't scale up to, you know, kind of societies that try to control other societies in such a massive way, which still have happened in the history of let's say
all societies.
other,
That's happened
but
in the history of all
but
societies.
it's a sort of evolutionary duality. You can evolve to develop more degeneracy, or you can evolve to develop more buffering. At some point, they all start developing buffering somehow. I don't know why. That's an evolutionary question. Maybe the two things have to go together, but certainly neoliberalism is putting all the strength into one, and then letting the other to be a consequence of the first. So I was thinking that this is a very interesting thing to do, to try to characterize the different worldviews using systemic in this paradigm, in the paradigm you were saying before, David. So this well-formed paradigm. Okay, so that's my comment, just to hopefully foster other comments.
Yeah, and let me invite Tom. Flora, give you a chance, of course, and then Tom just posted a comment. Tom, I might ask you to speak that comment so we could introduce it, and then I'll take a second step.
I was just stepping away from you into a more general frame of what I heard you saying, which overlaps with my work a lot. I said any paradigm that centers on the idea of interactivity among diverse entities or patterns and studies the nature of diverse forms of diversity, because there's lots of different ways to have diversity, and the nature of diverse forms of interactivity, and which of those forms particularly support generativity on behalf of life. If there's a study of that, such paradigms would naturally welcome diverse other paradigms into generative interactions with each other for evolutionary development. I heard some version of that in what you were saying, David.
Yeah, and it raises a theme for me, which I think for I hope I'm not being too repetitive for people that hear me a lot. But in nature, individuals might be exquisitely well adapted, and species might be very, very well adapted to their environments. But that doesn't mean their adaptations combine into harmonious societies and communities. And so actually the problems that we associate with laissez-faire neoclassical economics, which is lower level agents that are very good at pursuing their interests, but at cross purposes to each other, okay, that also exists in nature. And so it's a mistake to think that, you know, all ecosystems are somehow mutualistically organized. Some of them in some animal societies are like despotic human society. So for whole systems to function well is special. It's special in nature and it's special in human society. Special conditions are required in both cases. And I think that's why it's a mistake to look to nature in a broad sense or to indigenous societies in a broad sense. In all of those cases, what we really want and need, which is harmonious societies at a large scale, cooperation at a large scale, is very special and requires special conditions. And unless we understand what those special conditions are, we will simply fail. We'll build spectacular AI algorithms, for example, but because they don't have the common good in mind, then they will surely be part of the problem. And so I think that that's part of what we have to understand, basically. And then when we work as smaller level units, especially in small groups, um, which is the very opposite of the global, but it has to have the global in mind. And all of the intermediate levels has to have the global in mind. If it doesn't, then you're going to have, and I think that actually I want to work in spirituality and into the conversation. And I think that often this whole picture maps on to the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, which in the first place note that life is full of suffering, right? I just said that suffering is caused by craving, entities pursuing their advantage at the expense of other agencies, that there is a path out of this. And then what might that path be? Buddhism in one case, or a enlightened scientific worldview in the other case. And Gavin, if you'll forgive me, when Thomas, you were at the very beginning, you were describing your group in Brussels as a kind of an autopoietic unit, and people just drift in and they make themselves useful, and so it sustains itself even as individuals come and go. And that reminded me so much of a partnership we're beginning to form in India with Sri Aurobindo, who is a legendary Indian sage. And I've been reading up on him. And in the ashram, that the compound that surrounds him was just like what you described. People come and they stay, and they're fed. They're not paid anything, and then they made themselves useful, and the community sustains itself around a spiritual core. And I think one question that I have is, what is the core? I think there does need to be a core.
Yeah, the core, we call it motivation.
Yeah.
It's exactly the there are authors that have spoke about this, so and as well. I know about the economics of solidarity. Also, they speak about the C factor, cooperation factor. But in our case, it's very easy because these are students. They want to become researchers that make an impact in the world, and that's something that is like the inner drive of each of the individuals here. So that makes things very easy, actually, because they want to pursue an academic career.
That is the spiritual core, and it can be scientific, but what's important about it is that it's very pro-social at an expansive scale. You know, the people want to do good in the world, and they feel that the body of knowledge that they're learning and contributing to is what will take them there. And that's all that's all you need to be spiritual. You don't need other trappings of spirituality, in my opinion, although some of those other trappings, rituals and things like that can help. And there's no reason to and a whole emotional, heartfelt component. So there's no reason to leave them out. But it's so interesting that this leads in a spiritual direction. I'm glad that you agree. Gavin, thanks for your patience. Did you want to talk, Devin?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me all right now?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my internet. I love that. I loved your talk, and what it was reminding me of is we had a talk by Tamsin Willie Barker a while back about superorganisms, and I've always been struck by that idea. It's like the whole group of bees or ants or whatever is all working towards creating a better world, a better future for the next generation. That's the entire group. That's all they're doing. And I often think that that's the sort of value proposition or whatever that like most humans can get behind once we articulate it. I think Thomas is just saying these are students, they're they want to have an impact in the world, make a better place, do research, things like that. So but that's what we're all doing. We're all working on hopefully handing over the world in better environmental condition, better political systems, better healthcare, better education, the whole the whole 10 yards. So And I also think that that's extremely altruistic, that 3 generations from now, I'll never meet those people. There's certainly no way I'm getting anything back from them, but that's, what it's all about. And so anyway, that's my 2 cents. And so, those would be the values to teach AI, I guess I would say is, look, this is the goal. This is what we're all about. Make every decision with that in mind. And I think that would square things away pretty well.
Yeah, and I think it brings us back to the Noosphere conference, because if we sort of make that our paradigm in some sense, then we have to be working towards a global superorganism and must have a brain. That brain has to have this huge technology component, and that would be AI done right, because it has the global good in mind. And so I think that's let me make another major point.
Can I share something, David?
Yes,
if you
of
want?
course, of course, of course.
Yeah, with something that came to my mind when you were talking about this. Well, sort of this shift between local communities and sort of this bigger global perspective on it. And then on that, and I agree that we shouldn't sort of search for a solution in nature all the time, but something that I find important in the noosphere, and also what you also see in nature, that there's a really big diversity in values and in visions and in culture, etc. That and I think it's also important to honor these differences as well. And I think if you look at nature and sort of the global ecosystem, then of course there are communities or certain species that, if we would look at them for sort of cultural insights, then it would be really bad. But on a very high level, on an ecosystem, global ecosystem level, sort of the whole thing together with all this diversity, and also sort of these maybe non-cooperative or very sort of values that we wouldn't like to see in humans, on a very global scale, it still works well. Like there's a lot of diversity. It's sort of there is something in the system, even though there's a lot of this diversity there, even though it might be harmful on a very small scale. On a very big scale, it's still functioning and still sort of cooperating on a very high level. And what I think will be important for the noosphere, sort of creating this sort of, if we could go to sort of this global brain kind of mechanism, that these sort of local differences would also be, if it's possible, to also sort of honor these differences as well, and then have these different levels of complexities and sort of, in a way, try to study this as well. Like, how can these different levels work?
No, I agree completely. And we really have to work on that narrative. The first thing I'm reminded of is the Lord of the Rings, with all the different humanoids, different tribes and so on, the elves and the dwarfs and so on, all different, but then they come together and they cooperate. And I think as a biologist, if you are a biologist, an evolutionary biologist, you love the organism you study, every species you study, because it's such a miracle of adaptation that you can't help but admire it as to how it is structured in relation to its environment. And that's true if it's a parasite or a disease organism or a predator, or it's not, the species does not have to be good for the whole system for you to admire it for its adaptations to its environment. And I think we really need to think about cultural diversity in exactly that right way, is that cultural diversity is a bushy tree of life, like the bushy tree of biological life, and every enduring society is doing something very right, therefore has a tremendous wisdom just by virtue of the fact that it endures. It endures, even if it's not part of the global solution. And that actually leads me to my last major point, which is when you began, Thomas, talking about your group in Brussels again, I think it's so important to learn by doing. that we can study this academically, but really what we must be doing is forming groups, and then that's the real test of whether they endure. And for those that do endure, we need to communicate that to other groups. So there has to be like a communication system. And this is like, this is like fungal hyphae or slime moles and ant colonies and things like that. 1,000 different experiments. But there must be a way, not just if there's not a communication network, then we can't distinguish the successes from the failures. And so that's why it's important to have not just groups that we're thinking of from this perspective, but also networks of groups. And on that point, Pro-Social World started a network like this in Latin America with a grant that's now over, but it succeeded in establishing a group of groups in Latin America with Latin America as the focus. And I think that it's time to organize a second generation of that, because there's a lot more people and organizations in Latin America that could become connected, that are basically, they get the paradigm enough so that they could start forming a network which can rapidly expand. And so I think that including a gentleman named Pablo Reyes and his organization, Arca Latam, who was part of our first network, and who'll be a speaker in this series in just a few weeks. And so, and we also have the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, which Lauren is a part of. That's a worldwide society with hundreds and hundreds of members in Latin America. Brazil alone has 300 members in its chapter, and they're holding their annual meeting in July in Buenos Aires. So I think that there's so much coordination that we can do, which really does put our principles into practice. And that's the kind of inspiration from nature, I think, that we definitely can draw upon, a loose network of communicating agents and organization. And, we could really do that without money. I mean, just on the basis of our existing capacities, but much better if we get funding for it. And I think that collectively we can do that too. And the more it succeeds, then the more I think anyone who's really capable of providing enlightened top-down support, as we put it, would be happy to fund this because they too are pro-social. So
this is great to hear, because in my foundation we have been trying to do this bottom up, trying to connect with other groups and so on, but certainly it would be very good if we could join to a larger initiative somehow, because we have some capacities and some like interests, but also the cultural different. There are some multiple differences. I look forward to watch this talk. Because Pablo is, where is he based?
I think he's based in Chile.
Pablo Reyes.
Arca Latam.
I know a Pablo Reyes that is not him. It's a common name. Yeah. So, wow. Yeah. That will be good. Will be great. Great to know. Yeah, I checked the link.
Well, let's check out by just a round of reflections. Tom, would you like to reflect a little bit on what we did together?
I'm still trying to track it. I'm interested in the perspective adding into what I just talked to George Porter this morning about, people who are trying to use AI in positive terms, because I'm kind of a catastrophic view of AI. So I'm just appreciating what's been done here. Thanks.
Great. I'm not sure who Ivo Besseniers is. Are you a person, or is it just, are you there? I think maybe so.
Yeah, I'm there.
Hello.
Hello.
Would you like to check out with your impressions on our session?
Yeah, I think it was pretty interesting. It's nice to like meet your group. Yeah, I think it should also become like more clear or like more detailed, like we need like alternative economies and like different paradigms, but it's like still a lot of work to work them out and like make them more concrete, I think.
Excellent. Excellent. Lauren, how about you?
I really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you. AI isn't really my background, but I've been more and more interested in it and learning more about it the past year. And this presentation made me think of Google's generative AI platform that they released and then pulled back, I think, recently. And it just kind of reminded me of how I get probably so many big names that are trying to put out their own generative AI platforms, and there's kind of a pressure and timeline to do so. And then because of that, there might not be the proper training or that goes into it, or proper thought. And so this just reminded me that recreating a paradigm and can be really helpful in training these systems so that they can be more helpful and less harmful. So thank you. Lots of things to think about.
Awesome. Great. Well, Gavin, how about you?
I loved it. It was great. Thank you guys so much for doing that. It's fabulous. Yeah, lots to think about. Yeah, I guess it's it's a tool, and we'll get out of it however we design to use it properly or not. So yeah, so it's great. So very thought provoking. I've been thinking about this for a long time. This was a great one. Appreciate it.
And recorded, so for posterity. So I guess Lauren, Thomas, you get the final words.
Well, I would like to thank Flor first. I know she's doing a great effort to advance this on this problem, which is actually, if you put on her shoes, it's quite sad to work on this, because you see the world progressing in one direction and you want to provide a different view. We are connected on Zoom, we are paying for Zoom, it's all like this, and this creates this this sense of nonsense of what am I doing. But I want you, Flor, to feel that there is people in this world that follow what you think, and we are the same kin. So that's the first thing to say. Like, it's words of hope. This work must be done, and must be done by young people, like you. That it's very valuable that you, without having like a life of experience, can have the sensitivity to go for this. So that's on the emotional level for Flor, and also for the emotional level for myself. I feel like very happy when I met David, when I watched your seminar at Human Energy. It was like, okay, yeah, this is good, this is people doing the kind of things we want to do in the world. And the only problem is that we are too scattered. I come across people like this all the time, but it's always scattered. So it's good that this initiative is getting strength, and of course I'm up for trying to contribute to it. Now, at the more philosophical level, at this content level, I think that we will push forward the metaphor of the snail from the dynamical systems perspective and so on, as an alternative. And I think that after this seminar, we have a learning lesson. We learned something that we shall perhaps focus on the ontology of complex adaptive systems and cybernetic systems theory to provide like the perspective from here. It's also functional for a PhD as an academic work and so on. The other venue to explore all these kind of not analytically well constructed epistemologies, it's just gonna be much harder. As David said, like it's not like leaving this thing apart, but just standing where, like searching for the keys where the light is, that say. Okay, so that's my comment, and thank you everyone. It was a beautiful talk, a beautiful moment.
Great. Laura, any final words from you?
Yeah, thank you all for all the reflections and the super interesting discussion. I think it's really great that you came here, and also what Thomas said. It's really great to hear what others that also feel this need and sort of also working towards a different perspective. It's really nice. Yeah, and also what Thomas said with the talk that you gave, David, it was like such an interesting and really important and great perspective that I feel we both very really enjoyed it. And also for like the discussion that some other like different aspects to reflect on that you brought in David, and I will yeah, and I'm also still sort of reflecting because I'm partially so in this artificial intelligence group, and also really on the one side really seeing this social aspect and this sort of this network and connecting different like if maybe a form of artificial intelligence could just aid in making this process more efficient, of connecting people, or sort of having this fungal kind of network without this other completely not tied to this. If this could be something of aid, or if there would be a room for this, or if the other side it would just be becoming maybe more human and sort of trying to do this without technology, or yeah, something that I will be reflecting on at least.
Well, I cordially invite you to join both of you to join the multi-level selection initiative. We have 2 initiatives I put in the chat. Just read through my chat, and the either initiative might be interesting to you, but in particular the multi-level initiative, selection initiative, will be there will be a subgroup on the topic of AI, and so you need to be part of that group. You have a lot to contribute and a lot to get from it, and that will be starting up in just a little bit. So if you go to that link, there's information for how to sign up, and you can just be, part of our email list and learn about what we're up to. But
yeah, that would be great.
yeah, so I think that's part of talk about sparse connections. That's what can be changed. And Gavin has heard me talk about catalysis all the time, cultural catalysis, making things happen in months and years rather than decades or not at all. And I'm a very, very firm believer in cultural catalysis, like chemical catalysis. So, and that's essentially what we're doing in a meeting such as this, is we're bringing people together and we're bonding them to each other, and then we're released to repeat the process. So it's not hard to describe. It's just something you have to do again and again and again, and then build up this architecture, which in some ways, in my language, it's like a cultural inheritance system at a larger scale than ever before. So anyhow, that's what's in front of us. And thanks to everyone for being here. And this will indeed continue. So this is definitely not a one-off, that's for sure. All right, friends. Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for dropping in. Thanks, Ivo.
Thank you
Lauren, of
all.
course.
Goodbye, everybody. Happy
Bye-bye.
Friday. Happy
All right.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
David, do you think we can have a word today or maybe in a few days?